Alright, so that was a quick playthrough of the Night Tales game for the summative assignment of TSE 722. And here's just a quick run through of the Wise project. The ambience is pretty simple, so we have 2 beds, an air loop with some birds that was just captured right around the corner from here. And then another fairly low in volume loop with a bunch more birds. And then I also have a couple individual bird emitters that I placed around the map in the game. So there's common nightingale, sparrows, European nuthatch, woodpecker, and then here's also the loop for the little pond that's in the scene. So I'll play through these real quick. They're all fairly quiet. And all, similarly to the ambience assignment, have a trigger rate setting right here that sort of randomly triggers them within a certain amount of seconds. And of course, they're spatially tied to the emitters in the scene. The most important part, of course, of the sound design here being the player night character. I've grouped this in weapons and attacks, locomotion, which is all the Foley, status and feedback, which I made to have the death and get hit sound effects in there, and then the voice, which is where all the emotes live. And so for the weapon, I've made subfolders for all the individual weapons that we were tasked to make sounds for. And then for each of these, sheath, swing, unsheath, and the special attack where applicable. The special attack especially, no pun intended, has a constant loop, which is the whooshing and the ringing, and then also has sweeteners that are copied over from the Foley section of the night locomotion that play along with it. Which results in something that's not as obviously a loop, because the sweeteners that play while the night is spinning in circles is actually randomized, and so it doesn't repeat every couple of seconds like the bass loop does. And that's similar with the two-handed sword special attack too. Just slightly higher pitched. For the weapon impact, I made slightly different versions for weapon-based and unarmed. The weapon impact has like a slight sort of E-rated gore added to it, as well as a little bit of like a zing of metal. Whereas the unarmed one is a little more punch-focused. Locomotion here is where I spent a good chunk of my time because I wanted to have the gear on the night character be very dynamic in nature and have assets that can be reused quite a bit. The first example you saw of that was me reusing Foley assets from this stack of things right here. To punctuate the movement during the special attack. So under Foley X gear, you see I have attack sweeteners and then armor sweeteners A through D. Some of these get used across the board for attacks, for walking and such. Some of these don't. Attack, of course, is solely for attacks. So this plays during like attack windups. Whenever the knight's arms are moving during an attack, these play at different times, and we'll look at the events for that in a little more detail. Armor A plays exactly on the footstep. Armor B is one that plays in between footsteps, but is also roped in for some of the attacks and jumps and such. That one's a little more focused on the sound of the plates of the armor. C is more focused on, ringing metal, so small metal parts on the armor or attached to the gear. And then D, again, a little more focused on the plates. And these get used throughout, as I said. We'll look at that in the events. Footsteps, of course, separated in left and right. As switch containers, I chose to add different floor materials just because that's just the way I am. And yeah, I added dirt and grass layers as well as a thump that's omnipresent. And when you land on rock, it only plays the thump. Since that's less common, I figured I don't necessarily need to make a specific rock texture, and it works really well with all the other sweeteners there. So dirt, grass, and thumps. The thump to me was especially important just because I wanted to communicate that the knight's wearing boots. So having a consistent sort of low end on both surfaces, I think helps that a lot. And again, because I am the way I am, I also added the ability to have sounds for swimming. I added a couple lines of code that give me the ability to add swimming sound effects. So right here is where you see that. I added a water collider that upon entry switches the state to underwater, and then upon exit switches it back to open air, and then tagged the swimming animation accordingly so that it would post swimming events to Wwise. I also have enter water sounds and an exit water sound, as well as some swimming ones. Very necessary, I know, but it was fun to experiment with. For jump, I have surface material, just like for footsteps. Just so you hear sort of the scuffing of the feet as you jump, as well as a jump whoosh that is also part of the event. That is a singular sound effect that has a pitch randomization attached to it. For land, again, different surface materials. For roll, same thing. Made two separate iterations of that for dirt and for grass. And then for rock, I am reusing the dirt one. Double jump has two whooshes that are overlapping. And that's it on the locomotion front. For status here, what I implemented is just the death animations. You hear a nice long reverb on that too. I'll get to that in a bit. So 3 different sound effects there that are randomized, as well as for getting hit. And then for emotes, we have ones for death, getting hit, jumping, and landing. The landing one is also reused in rolling as well. And then for attack, there is a switch group, and I set a switch with every attack, whether the weapon that I'm using is heavy or light. And so that way the emotes can change. So that's for heavy and for light. So for heavy, I chose slightly more guttural ones. For light, ones that are a little more sort of higher up above the diaphragm. And then stingers right here just have our death stinger that happens once the knight hits the floor. Note the lack of transient there. That's because the animation already provides that in the knight death event up here, or knight death object. Revive. Our little underwater ambience. The death drone that plays upon dying and also underwater. That, as I so often do, is a geophone recording of a waterfall, more precisely the geophone stuck into the ground next to the waterfall. And here's a stinger when you enter the water, just to make it feel a little more like you are yourself entering the water. And this plays on top of the enter water sound effect. And then the level theme music is implemented as simple as can be. I did EQ it because I didn't quite like how boxy it was. This effect is, however, rendered, so it won't take up any CPU cycles in the process. We do have the musical theme right here, just playing in an infinitely looping playlist, and that is about the extent of that. Everything is sorted into these buses, so ambience speaks for itself, so does music. Sound effects has a couple sub buses, so SFX, player night, so all the sound effects that the player makes, voice, and then this environment verb that pretty much all of the locomotion sounds go through, as well as the voice. Noteworthy here, of course, is that both music and ambience do get sidechained by the SFX bus. The SFX bus has a meter on there, which sends its level to an RTPC, and that in turn sidechains both the music bus and the ambience bus, with a fairly gentle release time too, so that the music doesn't immediately come back, but it sort of ramps up in a way that you don't notice immediately, and takes about a second of release time there. We do have our death verb right here. That is what plays when you die on top of the animation and the voice emote. The reason I decided to implement it in engine here is because A, it doesn't take up a lot of RAM. 329 kilobytes is totally fair. And it's kind of cool because it could then be reused for any sort of epic finishers or something. It doesn't just have to be for the character dying despite its name. So I figured if this project were to grow, this would be a cool thing to have control over. Now, in the events, the important ones here to talk about are really the attacks. So each attack and locomotion event has an assortment of usually emote, the actual movement, a sweetener, and potentially one or two more sweeteners. So here's the sword attack, for example. Essentially, the different elements are timed to match the animation. So you see the emote has a 0.2 second delay. Sword swing has a 0.3. First sweetener plays at 100 milliseconds. The second one at 300 to sort of match the swing. Attack 2 just uses the attack sweetener. And so they're all slightly different. Here with the Sheath 2, you see that I could reuse Sweetener D as well as the attack sweetener. In the special attacks, you also see an attack sweetener plays while the wind-up's happening, so while the initial sword swing is happening, I am playing the sword swing. I'm also playing the sweetener and an emote, and then it is playing the loop of the special attack. Similarly here, swing, ending of the special event, emote, sweetener. And that allowed me to reuse a bunch of stuff all throughout. So yeah, I put in, this one has 2 layers of attack sweeteners since they're randomized, one at 300, one at 400 milliseconds. This one uses one of the armor sweeteners. The two-handed sword attack uses armor sweeteners C and D. So it was fun figuring out how well these work with the animations and figuring out which sweetener or sweeteners to use with each movement. And it's really cool because even if the main sound, in this case the sheath sound, is the same, the varying sweeteners do add some dynamism to it, one could say. And so that way you have like a smaller number of assets that can be reused almost infinitely. Unarmed, for example, sweetener D, sweetener A. Yeah, so it's all kind of cool because they can all be reused. And the same thing in jumping, getting hit. This one has the motherload of sweeteners here. I also put in stop events for the special attacks because I found that if you jump doing a special attack, it'll cancel the attack, but of course, Wise still thinks it's ongoing, so I put that in there too. Foot thumps here for the landing as well as the land event, 2 sweeteners, and an emote. For roll, stop the specials because you can roll in the middle of your special attack, roll play event, and then sweetener and emote. So yeah, that's pretty much how it's structured. I'm excited about having been able to reuse so many assets. I think that is pretty cool. And I think my total memory pool was about 9 megabytes all in. So I think that's pretty good. And I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on this assignment. See you soon.